When that's, come out and talk to me.
Video and audio.
All right, today is Thursday, September 12th, and this is the regularly scheduled Town Finance Committee meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order. Those present, I have myself, Counselor Shoup, and Counselor Cushing, so everybody's here. Item number 3 is approval of minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
No.
All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. All right, next up is, we have a couple of items that we're going to discuss today. And the first two are kind of linked, or I think we'll probably be going back and forth, is my guess, as we talk about both. The first one is a council goal that we set this year that we would work to create a capital plan for facilities over $5 million. And so I know staff has prepared an initial proposal to start conversation that we'll look at. And then we'll also talk about maintaining an optimal bond, our debt rating, which is part of our fiscal policy and something that was also a council goal. I know there's a proposal that we'll talk about that staff provided, but I think we might want a bigger conversation around that as well. So those are kind of the two big things. And then time permitting, Nick's going to give us a little bit of a preview, spoiler alert, for the session that he's going to be giving the council and broader detail around tax commitment. All right, so with that, we'll pass it off, or I'll pull up and share what we'll discuss. And then Norma, just remind me to stop sharing so you can share. So we'll go straight here. Is this where we wanted to go?
Yeah, that's where we want to start. So the ask was to come with a schedule, a plan of capital items that looking 20 years out that we expect to be 5 million or above. And so when you put that floor, basically end up with buildings. So first of all, the school, I want to highlight the school. The math doesn't add up across. It should be 35 million in all 3 years. So apologize for that. And the second thing is obviously we don't know the number. So we kind of picked the middle of the latest range that has been talked about in the committee. But again, that is no number that we're publishing as that's the target. That's just a flat guess at this point.
Yeah, I can provide some context if you want to know more about that number, but we need something.
105 down from 160.
Yeah, the ballot initiative that failed was 162 million.
And that number was informed by a community survey we did that, among other things, asked level of acceptability from a impact on taxes. And that essentially translates into a range between $200 and $400 increase in taxes. That translates to about $70 million project to 130. So 105 is simply roughly the midpoint of that.
Mm-hmm.
And a clear takeaway from that last school building process was that the group that was assembled think that to get this thing passed, it needs to be in the $100 million range. Now we need to figure out whether we can actually do what needs to be done to meet that budget.
So a little background on gathering the data. I met with the department heads and posed the simple question. Do you foresee any projects in the next 20 years that would cost 5 million and above? And interesting conversation with Chief Kendallin was, well, we might consolidate Pine Point Station in Dunston somewhere way out there in the distance. And so that's how that number got on the schedule in FY35. So that's just a speculation, but the more information we have and we start thinking about things, and as he analyzes staffing and equipment needs, it could land somewhere out there.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of talked about the school, community center was based out of the workshop. The number that came out of that was kind of somewhere in that range, and FY30 was kind of the earliest that we were told that we could get it on the schedule. And then the library expansion currently estimated at 12 million if it were to come forward. So those are kind of the things that came out of the discussion of 5 million and above.
If I could just make a couple of comments. When the council set its goal, I initially was elated with the target of 5 million, thinking, oh, and clearly there's just a handful of things, right? And so that suggested to me that the council really, what it wants to do is to prioritize among those big ticket capital items, kind of what is the pecking order and where do we reasonably see them falling, which is an important exercise and one that has plagued this town for as long as these projects have been around, frankly. And I don't recall a past council ever kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying this one shall be first. More and more through individual comments from councilors, I hear a recognition that the school needs to be our priority and come first. But there's not much conversation beyond that. So, that's an important exercise, one that staff can help inform on, but I think it's as much political as it is anything. But so I think we have to ask ourselves, is this exercise about prioritizing our priorities, those big tickets? Or is it about kind of doing long range kind of debt planning and understanding what's coming at us over, into the future? And there's a lot more that fall into lesser amounts that still add up and have sizable impact. And so Norm, in the course of his work with staff, has identified a lot of those lesser value projects, but costly nonetheless.
That's on the next page.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Couple questions about this sheet. Are we moving to the next page?
Yeah, let's focus on this one.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm just generally curious as to, how you come up with the 15 million for the fire station. And then.
That was a number that Chief said.
And then can that Dunstan actually be expanded? That's a pretty tight spot.
I think those are all good questions that we don't have answers to.
Yeah,
So,
at least
and
just a
then-
pure guess.
Right, with the community services, wholeheartedly disagree with this order and would love to see that further. I'm curious who put it into 2023, 2030, where, I mean, clearly Todd is like, this is not going to be relevant in a year, in 2
Yeah.
years. So I mean, we've already spent a substantial amount of money to come up with the 89 million, which in 2030 will be moot. And so I think that's something I would like to correlate.
And that's what happens when you start doing these long-term lookouts is the number you have today is only as good as it is today. And as you get more data and you get further out and things change, it doesn't become
And I
relevant.
mean, I realize I didn't say much at the workshop, probably because I have concerns about the location of the community center, but it bothers me that we have a package ready to go. I do not personally want to wait around for a school solution that we have no idea what it's going to be. That's just my opinion.
Mhm.
The 105 seems really low, no matter what proposal we come forward with. And then library, I just, again, think the community center should come first. So, and I don't know if that's just, and that's where I don't know what the exercise here today is are we out of finance prioritizing personally? Or,
So
because I would love to do that.
what I think we can give some of that personal feedback, but again, I look at this exercise maybe slightly differently. I think to Tom's point, there's when we want these things, and then there's what are our options and what does that mean in terms of our fiscal health and our debt? And so like, what I would want to see is this recommendation, looking at and understanding what is the tax impact year over year as a result of this?
Mhm.
And then what is the impact to our financial metrics that we look at to maintain our debt rating? To say, hey, this is like pretty conservative. We can actually move things forward and maintain a strong debt rating, keep the tax rate below 5% in the highest year, and like make sure that we're looking at it more from a debt fiscal perspective, where the numbers kind of support the projects, obviously, but if we can see a model that shows, hey, we can put the community center in FY27 and have the school and generally have healthy debt metrics and keep the tax rate at a good place, then to me, hopefully that helps us have a conversation about what we can afford more than like what we want. And I think that's kind of that's what I view the finance committee responsible
Right.
for, to say, let's look at some scenarios, let's see what that says. And then I don't know if we choose what happens. I think we bring that to the public and say, we have options. all of them are really kind of dependent on people's willingness to pay for these. We can always put stuff earlier. But let's look at the tax impact, let's look at the impact to our debt and make sure that that's a decision the community is supportive of. And then we can kind of hopefully get to a real plan that is a mixture between what the community wants and when they want it with balancing the fiscal health and metrics. Did you have something to say, Counselor Cushing?
Too much. You know, in terms of looking at these numbers, they don't mean much to me. And I can't remember, Nick, what the current valuation is, but until I translate them into how much do they cost a household in terms of taxes. My recollection, which may not be good when I did the math in the community center, is that it was about $320. Now, maybe I did the math wrong. Per year, not a small number. And I come back and I say, well, what is the school cost per household? I mean, those are the numbers that really need to be out in front, because 89 million, if we had a tax base of 250 billion, might not seem like a big deal. But I believe, what are we, 70, what's the?
The tax base is 7.8 billion.
So 7, 8. I don't even know if I can remember how to get a billion on my thing.
We do have some debt modeling that will take, your exercise is important, but it's simply looking at value as of 2025, tax rate as of 2025, so on and so forth. It's not considering what other debt we're holding, what debt will shed,
Sure.
what capacity that, so it's a far more complex analysis to really understand where is the best time to fit these big ticket items in.
I understand
Yeah.
that. And it seems to me that you start with an estimate of gross cost,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't be a bad thing to augment that with an estimate of, in today's dollars, what kind of burden would that put on a household today? And I recognize that the valuations are going to grow over time. There's all kinds of other variables, but
Mhm.
you sort of have to ask, well, where do we start with this?
Mhm.
And when I look at this stuff, I say, gee, the town has rejected $160 million school project. They're now saying to us that we think we can afford around 105 million. And by the time we get it done, if we hold to that number adjusted for cost 2 years down the road, then we'll probably have a, $90 million school in there. And so I think that, I don't know that we should be necessarily setting the priorities, but I think that we have a duty to sort of explain what's this going to cost Mary and Mike, best estimate.
Mhm.
And so, if you think, for example, community center, we know that they want to charge like $420 for a family or something in that range. Well, that's in addition to what everyone is going to pay in terms of their monthly tax bill. So my feeling is that we need to identify the projects, and then we need to provide information because that's the question that at the traditional kitchen table that people want to ask when they evaluate it is, what's this going to do to my taxes? And in the absence of any other information, they're going to think it's going to do terrible things to my taxes.
Mhm.
And some of that, as you very well know, some of that data is contingent upon when we slot the projects into the schedule. So we at some point need to come to some type of estimate of when we think these are going to happen. So, I mean, this is starting that conversation.
Yeah.
Sure, I understand that.
And everyone has an opinion, and I don't know that anyone's wrong in terms of what should come first. I guess the point is, we observed that these three big tickets,
Mhm.
we're showing them in the first 5 years. So we're in the front end of this.
Yeah.
This is not long range. This is within sight for us.
Yeah.
But I think it would be helpful for the council, and of course, future councils can change,
Mhm.
but to once and for all, at least name the pecking order.
Yeah.
name the order of things.
And again, this is where, just to get back to the sheet, I have a question about what we did for the school and what we're doing for community services, like how we're taking that 3-year approach to tranche the debt, given the size of the community center. Can we do that in 3
Yeah.
years or 2 years? Because I'm assuming it's not a single year build.
No, it's more like a 2-year bill,
Yeah,
right?
I
So
would
we would
say-
split that 2 years.
Because the point I'm trying to say is like, and to your point as well, like projects aside, what we're showing is there's 3 years that we're gonna potentially have to do something that's in the 35 million range.
Yeah.
There could be 2 years when we're doing something that is
45 million.
each. And so again, if we, to your point, kind of could see, well, what does that look like if we front loaded it all even closer? What does that look like as we spread that out? To your point, what does that mean practically in terms of tax impact and what people will see? And then we could say, okay, we think we have a conservative plan that, again, unfortunately might be a 10-year plan. And then we have an aggressive plan and we know the difference. So like, do we want to go with something in the middle? And what that is could be based on the project, or it could be based on how much debt we're willing to take on in a given year to kind of meet certain, again, fiscal health metrics and what people would see. So like, in my opinion, the way I would like to see us kind of model this is similar to what Counselor Cushing is saying, where I'd like us to think of like some scenarios and then also think of like what's acceptable, or what parameters do we want to see? For example, do we want to see a model with a scenario where we want to know like where the impact to taxes is going to be plus 3%, plus 5%, plus 10%. So we can kind of see where their spikes are to say, okay, this year looks like a tough year, but it's in 2029. And if we give people enough notice that, hey, this is coming, is that acceptable to the public that they can say, yeah, I want all this stuff early. So if that means 2029, we're going to see a 8% tax increase, and that's acceptable, then okay, that's the plan and that's what we would go with. But again, I think we have to kind of have some scenarios, look at some metrics, and then be able to say to the public, which of these are you most comfortable with? Because it really goes back to that kitchen table conversation of, do you want a community center in a school so bad that you're willing to have your taxes go up 10% for 3 years? And if so, that's great, like we can do that. Or if people are like, yeah, I'd really like to keep it lower, so maybe that does mean we have to make choices. So
the school wants to be on the ballot a year from now, is that correct?
That's the timeline that they're preparing for,
Right.
yes.
And so the community center sort of missed the window to be on this ballot,
mhm,
correct? Right. So now if we're looking from a practical perspective and saying, where do we go from here? I mean, there isn't anything that prevents us from simply doing out the math and putting, putting all three of them on the ballot and let the public prioritize them, with the understanding that we'll be back next year with, whatever's left. And you can continue to go there. I mean, the alternative for that is that we make up the public's mind for them. We say, we think the school should be the priority here, which we can say, okay, but that shouldn't prohibit us from letting people decide. So the alternative is we take a community center where we've had people work very hard to develop, we spent $100 grand on the plan, right? Which, don't get me started, but we've spent $100,000 on the plan. And so then for us to turn around and say, well, let's just set that aside till 2026, strikes me that it doesn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
And so I guess you probably all figured out by now that I'm really a fan of when we have a charter that says voters get to decide, that we give them a shot at it, even though the outcome may not be what we necessarily think is the best for peace and love
Mhm.
and sustainability, et cetera.
The only thing I would say though is that we do have a fiduciary responsibility around our debt, that we need to make sure we understand those implications and consequences, because say they all pass and our debt rating goes down because our metrics show that we're a more risky investment, and then we're paying more. Like, again, I just want to know, are people willing
Well-
to, like, I think that has to be part of the conversation. It's not just, do you want this, but
Well,
going back to your kitchen table conversation, are you willing to truly have that impact? And if you really are, then great. And I think we owe it to the public to first show them that, hey, we understand the consequences. We want to make sure you understand the consequences. And if they're acceptable, then you can vote how you want to vote. If that means like front loading everything. So I think it would be good to look at this in a front loaded manner to say, I don't think the library is quite ready to come forward with anything, so I really don't think that one does, but say we do a bond in FY 25 for a school and a community center, with the library coming a couple years later. What does that look like? What's the financial impact? How does that
Want to
impact?
run that
members?
scenario?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think this scenario is a fine scenario to run that feels kind of like it is making some choices around options.
We need to update the debt model that would, include all the new information with valuation, updated budget numbers.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily ready to roll, but that's exactly what it was designed for, is to
Yeah.
plug and play.
Yeah,
Shift them out or in, increase in value or decrease.
yeah.
I do think it's a risky proposition to put multiple big ticket items on the same ballot. I think it's just, it strikes me human nature is such that it's really hard to support two. And so one's going to lose. And at least in my mind, I think you've got needs and wants here. And in a perfect world, we'd have it all. But the school seems to, in my mind, seems to be in a different category because it truly is a need. We can't not do it. Whereas with library expansion and a community center, yeah, we'd all love it, but we'll live tomorrow without it.
I think to your point, that's where we keep the school as a constant on the front, and then where we have the room to move
Toggle back and forth the
is
others.
with some of the others, just to see like what that movement means. And again, like, I would like to see what it looks like if we do go with both, and I understand there's risk. But again, we're not worried about the risk here. I think we're worried about the financial implication and the impact to our debt. For this exercise, again, the political conversation on timing,
Mhm.
I think, is one that we can have eventually, but I think it's good to focus first on more that kitchen table conversation, like what does this look like, but also how does this impact our debt? And hopefully we all agree that the school is kind of the constant that does need to kind of maintain the front end. So even if that fails, unfortunately, again, then we still got to keep it as like the next year thing. Like, we got to keep at the school year over year to make sure that it stays at the forefront. And again, that could have implications.
Would it be productive to do kind of a live, to run the scenarios kind of actively for us to see it in real time?
Yeah.
Because I think the model's set up such that it's just changing some numbers, fairly simply.
I think seeing that would be helpful. I think the one thing we should think about too, and I don't know, Karen, if this is what you're getting at, but community center said it was $82 million if we went to ballot now, and then there was an 8% escalation year over year. So I want to make sure if we move things out that we're accounting for that to make it more accurate. So like 82 million today, but if it was an FY 30, it would be like 120 million. And so again, that's important that the public knows the longer we wait, the more expensive it is, the more it may impact taxes in the future. So again, the choices we make today to delay just become more expensive.
Mhm.
And so I would like to make sure that as we shift things, we come up with a common factor that says it's an 8% annual increase in cost if we choose to move anything out, like the 12 million that's in the library CIP right now, like if it's in FY29, it's gonna be 30 million probably, and so we just gotta like make sure.
Yeah, unless they do a different project.
Yeah. So in my opinion, like what would be helpful to see, and I can't recall if the model shows this, is like, again, what's the increase to taxes based on what that model spits out? But the other piece that we'll talk about on the next item of the agenda is like, how do our fiscal health metrics look as well? And I know some of that's gonna be probably a little bit harder to predict. But you know, that's what's important to me, especially the one around debt per
Yeah,
capita.
built into the model, it does have our current debt held. So I think we need to update that. Just, it's a year old at this point, but so it does take that into account. How it translates into those metrics might take a little more work.
Mhm.
So Nick and Norm, I presume we're capable to update the debt model.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it in months, but yeah.
Yeah, I talked to John Clucci just earlier in the summer, and he, as a hobby, he was prepared and willing to do it. I think he's been very busy with his business, so, and we can't rely on a citizen volunteer for these sorts of things, so.
Yeah.
We have all the tools, we just need to update it with better information.
Counselor Cushing?
Question for Norm. Do you know what our max borrowing capacity is today? i.e.,
Statutorily, or you'd be astounded.
based on on healthy debt ratios and so forth, this is how much we owe, this is how much we could borrow right to the max and stay within our parameters.
To maintain an optimal credit rating?
Yes, which we can define in a few minutes.
Right.
Right. Yeah,
That's a good question, but I think it's a complicated answer, Norm.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, so
Because you
Well,
have
you appear to be searching for one, and I can't imagine that you'll find one
well,
very
well,
quickly.
I think that's okay. You don't
Well,
have-
what I
you
was
don't have to
searching for was the statutory limit, which that's very easy. That's a pure math.
Yeah, it's something in the order of $700 million of debt held. It's a stupidly high number that
Yeah.
we'd never approach.
Right. And then there's, what the banks, I don't know if they still use, but your household can get a mortgage at 30% of your gross income. I imagine that there's some kind of
Mhm.
metrics that come to that. And I think that's sort of important if I were looking at gauge,
Mhm.
sort of be wondering how much capacity do we have? And, how much gas in the tank, if you will, and how does that compare to what our appetite is? So if I add up here, 200 million bucks, give or take, let's just pretend for a minute that all that went on the ballot, and everybody said, yeah, could we do it? I mean, that
Yeah,
goes to your question. And so I think that those kinds of things are reasons to explain to voters, look, we have the responsibility to pick one, that we
Mhm.
can't afford to borrow for both of them. And based on what we think you think, we're going to pick this one. But that's entirely different than saying, these are our priorities.
Yeah.
We hope you like them.
Our financial advisor, I think, could be very helpful there. I would suggest that we go through the exercise, run scenarios, ideally have a preferred scenario or two, and have him opine on those as opposed to, shooting
So-
blindly.
Yeah.
Statutorily, we can do 15% of our total assessed value. At
Big
June
number.
30,
Big number.
at June 30, 23, in the audit report, which is on our website and available for public consumption. 475,349,000.
475 million.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm
That's
going to.
23, if with the.
It is the
7.8,
statutory, that's the debt limit.
But now it's
Increased that by
7.8 billion,
Yeah,
so it's.
so it's even higher now with Nick's work.
Sure.
And at that time, we had 79,690,000 of GO bonds outstanding, so we had used up a little over 16% of our statutory limit,
Statutory.
limit.
Gotcha. Okay,
So,
well, but that's, I think that's a helpful number. I'm assuming that this is a faulty assumption, but I'm gonna make it anyway, that the people who set that statutory limit had some interest in ensuring that the cities and towns in Maine remain solvent.
Yeah. So
But
the
not
financial,
necessarily.
the financial metrics that were held to that Joe Kater provided is consistent with the statute that to get the highest score on the metric on debt as a percent of market value, it would be below 3%. And so right now Scarborough, at least the last time you presented, was at 1.77%, but because of the reval, that number will go down. So I think for me, it's like, what I want to say is, do our projected models keep us at that level so that we can maintain or do better in our debt rating? So to your point, it's like, if we made a choice that got us to a point where we're now at 6% of market value, which would potentially put our debt at risk, that is when I think we say, oh, I don't know if we can afford this, or I don't know if we want to do that. This metric in particular, though, I don't think we're ever gonna, I think we'll, even with, if we did all 200 tomorrow, I think we would still be under that 3%.
But you are getting, I think, to the heart of the matter,
Mhm.
which is to say, you know, when we are being fiscally prudent using those metrics, you know, I think you can make a value judgment as to whether or not for certain things you want to slip to the right of that number, and other times you would slip to the left of that number. But at least you know where the number is, and then you make decisions with an understanding what the implications are.
Mhm.
It's entirely possible that we could say to people, look, yeah, we're gonna allow our bond rating to slip a little bit. It might cost us, you know, some basis points, but we think that's worthwhile.
Mhm.
Okay. But at least you're having a transparent, honest
Yeah.
conversation about that.
Yeah.
That's,
And I think that's where I think when we get to whatever the recommendation is, that is the conversation the council will have with the community is, we did the work, we looked at the numbers, we understand the risk. We're supportive of following this plan. And we want to know, are you guys supportive of it as well? And if it's an overwhelming no, because some of it is, what's the impact to our debt, which is probably the lesser of the concern, I would think, as much as what is the impact to my personal taxes. So we have to tell both stories. We have to say, this is a approach that we're taking on some risk or no risk or minimal risk for debt that we are confident can stay within our numbers to maintain that optimal debt rating. But there is a tax impact that you have to be willing to pay. And if you're willing to pay, we've done our work to say we're solvent, we're good, but you have to also agree to pay more upfront. And again, that will go down year over year, or we could spread it out. Like, it's really up to the public to tell us what's affordable.
so, John, when I think back to some of the conversations and pushback around the land bond and the conversation that we had here, that was essentially the questions that we asked initially was, what's this do to our debt? What's it do to the taxes, and so on and so forth? And I, you know, believe that we were all satisfied that the town could incur, or particularly could have a basically earmark $6 million of borrowing capacity and could tolerate spending it all or borrowing it all if we needed to. And I think that is the conversation. What I saw in some of the pushback was that it was sort of an easy game to sort of say, well, what about, you know, look at what this is going to do to our bond rating and so on and so forth. This body needs to say, this is what it's going to do, and in our view, it's okay. Now, your question is, can you afford it? And if you, in your affordability calculus, if you would like to come back in your mind and say, I'm gonna vote against this because I think these people are full of it when it comes to their calculus on bond review, that's your privilege.
Mhm.
But our job is to testify to certify, I'm gonna say it differently, cut through the complexity, the bond ratings and all of that other stuff and say, look, you hired us to figure this out. We did, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's
That's,
in most simple terms. I
Yeah,
can say.
and that's the message I would like to get at the end of this. I think we have to do the work to show that we've
Right.
done that. And I would love it if the outcome was, we can put the community center early, we can do the school. And then there does have to be that broader conversation with the public around affordability and what they're willing to afford. And I think ultimately the council could decide, well, we're gonna still put it to vote and we're gonna let you decide. Like I'm becoming more and more, like some days I'm like, oh no, we have to pick, we have to choose. But then some days I'm like, no, it's not our job to pick and choose, it's the public's, like you said. And when we have projects that are ready, I do feel like I would like to not hold on to them, but I would like to be able to say, we did our work and fiscally it shows there's minimal impact to our debt rating, so that's not an issue. The issue really just becomes affordability, and do people want to pay extra taxes for the additional debt services is gonna incur? And if the answer is yes at the polls, great. If the answer is no, because they don't like certain projects or it's too much, like that's okay too, but I think I would love to see us have a conversation with the public on that before we make decisions to get that insight a little bit of what is affordable.
And as I'm thinking about this relative to the community center, I think it's entirely possible to say, well, we can't do it this November, but we could do it this June.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that honestly, it would be worthwhile to really parse out both of those numbers so that we could make a decision. And I believe we could ask the advocates themselves, do you want it to go before, you've done the work, you get some say in the timing. Would you like it to go next June? I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I'm just saying there's another opportunity.
Mhm.
And that we should certainly want to parse out the fiscal impact of the community center so that we can make some form of go, no go with the input of those people who work so hard on it.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to their ask of like, don't put this on the shelf. So
Right.
that's where I agree. Like, I think we need to evaluate, is June feasible along with a November school project? Can we afford it? How does it impact our debt metrics? And if the answer is, doesn't really hurt our debt metrics and we've had enough conversation with the public, I would support putting a community center on a June ballot and a school project on a November ballot. So I'm not opposed to that, but I want to make sure we answer the question, what's the impact to our debt metrics? And then a bigger question to the community of, are you willing to,
What's it gonna do to my taxes?
yeah, and are you willing to go that far with us? Because if so, we'll put it on. If not, then it informs the council of how we may
Yeah.
want to stagger things. And I think having a option 2, even for the public to react to, that's like, option 1 is maybe community center in June, school in November, library, some of the other stuff you guys have. Again, those are good to kind of continue to build out. I think that's option 1. I think option 2 would be maintaining the school in November and then having some flexibility on how we would maybe move out the community center and a school, or sorry, the community center and the library. That would just give an alternative lens of like what it would look like if we move stuff out. Maybe what you guys have is fine for option 2. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on.
Well, it's very interesting. And I'll throw in one more confounding variable. I think I said this at one of the last meetings. Let's just pretend for a minute that the school solution that comes out is one that is similar to the consolidated school solution. And that leaves us with 3 places that I think have gymnasiums, they have meeting rooms, they have all kinds of things in the neighborhood. I mean, fundamentally, the only thing they really don't have is an indoor track and a pool. And so when you're thinking about a lot of the things that I heard in the community center, which was gathering, it was, you know, it was, I hope, more than just a sports complex, that what actually happens. I mean, if you think about turning those 3 things into community centers and putting a pool someplace, that might have been attractive to folks. So the timing of all of this does sort of matter. So we put the community center up as is, and it passes next June, then we're on the way down that path without understanding what happened with the school.
So,
And again, I'm not taking a position one way or another. I'm just trying to suggest that the timing of these things has implications in a variety of ways.
I mean, even with the original recommendation for the school, the intent was always its primary purpose is a school. And while there was discussion of like, could we do things like we did at Wentworth, it was like, no, this has to focus on a school. And I think that is currently still the focus, right? The desire is to make it just a school. And I would be concerned about trying to conflate the two to some degree because the school is only available for public use for those facilities after school hours. So like, if the seniors want to go and gather, they can't do it until the evening, but they would want to do it. So I think they can live separately, and I don't suspect that what the school is going to do is kind of create more space for people to gather. I think it's gonna, the only thing that could happen is, depending on where they choose the site, we might have some savings for the community center potentially with a pre-existing site or.
We could have 3 vacant school buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the point that I'm making. And those, I haven't been in all of them, but the ones that I've been in strike me as serving many of the purposes that I heard outlined in the community center proposal. So again, all I'm saying is that one of the things that could be on the table is the return to the logic of a consolidated school, which would leave, or some other configuration that would leave one or more of those buildings vacant.
I don't know if those lands are big enough to house the current proposal. And I think my only feedback in that conversation is, I would say the biggest feedback we got from the committee was the location needs to be central to the campus. I personally feel like we could have a million uses for those 3 properties that wouldn't even touch on the community center. We have such a need for fields and other type of surfaces and things like that. So I don't think they need to be intertwined personally.
Yeah, the 8 Corner site probably is the one that is largest, and it's of the 3. And but to your point, I don't even know if that's big enough. And undoubtedly, some of the services that were envisioned in the new community center could be done in a refashioned school, but not all of them, certainly. You know, a senior drop-in center, of course, but these are old, tired school buildings that were specialty built, and they'll be very difficult without major rehab, if not total reconstruction, to do much of anything modern. Okay.
So just to circle back so that we can hopefully have some options for modeling. So are you guys comfortable with option 1 being community center in June? And again, ideally it's the 2 tranches, right? That we would do one in 1 year, one the next year. The school and FY are going to ballot in FY 20 or November 25. We can keep this one that was provided as like another option too, just to kind of see what it shows. And I think those 2 things will be telling to say, what does it look like if we put it all front loaded? What does it look like if we spread it out? And again, I think that seeing that will let us kind of, 1, answer the question of like, well, what does it do for our debt? And then two, I think similar to how you had the reaction you did, I think if we put option two out and say, if we wanna like only go up $200 to $400 a year in taxes, then with the school coming, you know, are people comfortable with the communities that are going that far out? Are they willing to like kind of bite the bullet for a couple years to pay a little bit more to get it sooner? Like, I think that's a fair
And so
question.
our work is to update the debt model.
Yeah.
And then we can run at least these two scenarios and whichever other ones you'd like us to.
Yeah. And the thing I would like to understand with the debt model, again, hoping that the same metrics that Joe shares with us, that we can forecast the impact to those as well. I know some of these might be easier than others, but like being able to like really answer the question that Counselor Cushing said of like, what is the impact to our debt, and are we showing that we're able to successfully do these and maintain an optimal debt rating?
Mhm.
I think that would be the ideal position to be in. Or to his point, like if the risk is we think this could drop us and the basis points would look like X, what does that really mean then too in terms of impact?
Mhm.
Is that something you guys think could be done for our next meeting?
I don't know about Joe's input. I think updating the debt model, running at least those two scenarios, and then maybe doing some live scenarios with you.
Okay,
I think we could have for our next meeting.
does that sound like a good plan on this? You
I'm
good with that,
committing-
Counselor Cushing?
I'm looking to my right, in terms of updating the model.
I'll get the mathematician to help me out.
With our powers combined, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the feedback I got about the model, it's a wonderful model, but it's also complex. So if we need to simplify it too, to make it
Yeah.
this work lighter. Again, I appreciate the desire to be super accurate, but I also think trying to model things out 20 years is like, we can't predict the future. Things are gonna
Yeah,
change.
there's
So
only so much you can do, and everybody's assumptions are valid because they can see the future as well as I can see the future, so.
yeah. So we have to kind of make some good guesses. So again,
Yeah.
if there's also a simplified model that you guys can do that's easier than trying to work with the current one, I'm comfortable with something simpler.
We'll work on that.
What are the big assumptions? Interest rates, where they're going?
That's essentially the largest one, is what do we expect interest rates to be, and right now,
But when you're running this over a 30-year horizon, which is the length of these bonds, you need to be considering value in each and every year, 30 years in the future, effective revals, what effect it has on tax rate, municipal spending, all of those things matter.
Yeah.
Well, that's where Karen put all of
CPI, I
that.
mean, how do you inflate the
Yeah.
cost of things? I mean, pull one lever and it throws another one awry, so all that comes into the model.
And I think it's gonna be more accurate earlier than it is gonna be later. So
Absolutely.
that's where it's like.
Yes, I think your scenarios are just playing with these big projects in those first 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we're working at the front end.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it'll be valid. The exercise will be valid. It'll give us some good, solid information that we can make some informed decisions on.
Mhm.
I don't know if it will give you the preferred scenario, but it will probably eliminate some of them to say, oh no, that has dastardly effects. And then I think you need to put it through kind of the political calculus of,
Yeah,
I think what goes first matters.
yeah,
It has potentially a effect, maybe a chilling effect on the things that follow.
okay. Anything else on this topic before we move to the next item?
Did you want to go through that second sheet at all, or?
I don't know if we need to go through that. I think it would be good to add it into the packet, just so that it's there for the public. And again, if there's anything,
Just background on that, we talked to staff, since this was such a skinny list and we felt that looking at the projects between 600,000 and 5 million, kind of what would that look like? And that's why we did that spreadsheet.
okay. I think including that in the packet will be good, and as we do the modeling, including that will be good. The only thing, Tom, that And again, I see this as like a living exercise. Maybe that happens once a year too, because I know with the vulnerability assessment, I'm sure there's gonna be some big investments that we're gonna have to make, but maybe not all in that same 5-year horizon, like they might be longer term, but again, I think we're gonna get more input through the transportation study, the vulnerability assessment, the open space plan. If the school has any other long-term capital needs, like, I'm sure this has to evolve. All right, so
And we do have other sources of funds. Our TIF revenues are likely, they will increase year over year. And to the extent that we can use those are non-debt related ways to fund capital items. So we've got some other things to consider.
yeah, the impact fee piece, we never really. I felt like that was a missed opportunity, and it's difficult to explain when we're talking about the school. About how, I know it was 160 million on the ballot, but what we were planning was for almost 30% of that to be paid for by new development. So there is kind of the impact fee component that for a lot of these projects also help to kind of.
And of course, we've not advanced an updated school impact fee because we don't know what that
Yeah.
project is yet. But we'll do that as soon as we know.
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
All right, so next item on the agenda is a potential update to our policy and discussion around making an adjustment. So what staff provided was a pretty simple update. I don't know, Tom or Norm, if you guys want to talk to your recommendation.
Yeah, we were trying to recall how this came up, but as I recall, it was Counselor Cushing brought it up, and I don't see the word optimal, so it must have been a word, that was a word that you perhaps put forward.
That was a council goal, so we said.
Okay, thank
maintain
you.
an Optimal debt rating.
So as you look at the fiscal and financial policy, in the debt management section, really just right on page 1, and that's, we've given you just an excerpt from that piece here. It speaks to it in particular in that section 3. And historically, currently it says that the highest possible credit rating. I think we were suggesting a way to kind of a fairly light touch, but getting to what you want to do is changing the language to say a high grade or above. And John's pulled up that sheet that shows what that high grade or above means. And we're currently in that range. And I think we can all agree we want to stay in that range.
I'm fine with that. I think because if our goal was to have a prime rating, we would just say prime. The only concern that I have about it is that before I scanned down to this page, I read that and I said, well, is high grade a term of art? Or is it just a general statement that says we'll do the best we can? And so I think that it would be useful, whether it's with an asterisk or somewhere, to indicate that high grade references this document because
That's why
because historically you've had newbies like me who come to this and labor shortly under the illusion that things are written in English and that that your common understanding of language applies here, and you'd read that and you'd go, well, that's pretty nebulous.
Yeah.
So I'm fine because high grade means that we will say
It's a defined term.
It's measurable
Yeah.
is the word I like to use. It's measurable.
It's a defined and measurable term.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you could reference this chart or say as indicated by or some such thing.
Defined by the credit rating agencies. I understand your
You
point.
understand my,
Yep.
Yeah, that
I'm
was
not trying to
my-
overcomplicate it. I'm just trying to tie that.
On with that.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. Okay, sorry. Thought we.
I mean, you're bringing up exactly what I thought, like when I first read it, I was like, well, what's high grade? And then when I looked at this, I was like, oh, okay.
And maybe we can do that by footnote or putting in quotes, but
Whatever.
somehow or other to identify that that means something.
Let's
That's
source the.
source that. Okay,
Schedule.
good suggestion.
Karen,
Yeah.
any thoughts on the adjustment?
No, it just seems appropriate to actually reference the actual language used.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think to the average person, this probably doesn't mean much of anything other than we probably have all heard about junk bonds.
Mhm.
And
Right.
those are ratings below a certain grade.
Sure.
Seat there.
And again, the reason why I wanted the appendix ratios on here is because a lot of times in our fiscal policy, we reference these as targets and things that are intended to help us maintain that high rating. And so the one thing I was trying to like look at this and what we have and what Joe presents. And I think they're pretty similar, but I do think he had maybe some other metrics, and I just want to make sure that if it's important that we're looking at other metrics to help with our fiscal health, that we list those in here as well. And do we need to, are the targets we have in here the appropriate targets? Because these are like, this goes back to Counselor Cushing, like your conversation last, or when we looked at unassigned fund balance. That is one metric that's important, but these are all the metrics that are also important. So we set a policy goal that said we want to get to 16%. Does the committee want to recommend anything around some of these other targets to say we want to, be within certain ranges to make sure that that's where we stay as a council?
These, I can tell you, these were informed certainly by our financial advisor. Prior finance committee probably spent better part of a year, almost 2 years with the overall policy, but they spent a lot of time here. So I think all of these metrics are relevant. And that's why we've called them out. These are something we should just pay attention to on an annual basis.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I don't quibble with any of these because they seem to make good common sense. What would be, I think, very useful on an annual basis, maybe you do this, is to just produce a spreadsheet that says, here's how much we owe, here's what our debt service is, and here is where it stands in relationship to each one of these policy items.
The policy requires us to report annually. I can't say that we've done that religiously, and we actually have a dashboard, a very simplified version of this, and it's color coded, red, green, yellow, just to say, of these metrics, are we moving in the right direction? Are we in a position of watch, or are we in a position we need to be concerned?
We technically met that because Joe did come and present this. So like, again, I think, at least since I've been on council, I think every year we've had him come and present. And so what I'm referencing, and this might look familiar, I just pulled this from an old agenda, was this slide that I think you might recall that was like, when Joe comes and presents, he looks at these 6 metrics or these 7 metrics, which are very consistent with these. Some I don't think we need to put in here, like he shares the top 10 taxpayers. Like we can't really control the top 10 taxpayers.
I included that in the packet, but I don't see it. Are you looking at the one that has the yellow bubbles?
I would direct you to.
Yeah.
To the statistical section of the.
I don't think I did,
ACFR.
John. I intended to.
Those statistics are reported annually in the ACFR,
Mhm.
back in the statistical section. So even if there was not a formal presentation of an Excel spreadsheet, here's the table. The data is presented to you formally every year when the audit report is.
I think the concern is that it gets lost in the context of the big audit, right?
Yeah.
In back on page 120. So the intent was to simplify it, to make a point of coming together once a year and
Yeah.
just checking in on these things.
Yep.
But the ACFR is an interesting
No,
document.
I
Everybody.
beg your pardon.
Yes. We all read it like through and through multiple times and memorized. Yeah.
Of course.
You and Kate can have fun with it.
Yeah.
We need to have an act for party.
Should.
Say that right? Yeah. Okay. So again, I don't know if there's any action here. I just wanted to make sure we looked at these and agreed that there was no changes. I don't think we need to change anything. I just think it's good to remind ourselves that these are the other metrics that when staff is kind of doing some of that analysis for us, we need to make sure that for that 5-year plan, we're looking at these as well to say, what does this mean for our debt rating, or where do we have some risk? And again, we did recently recommend, and I think this has to go to the full council language changes around fund balance. So I'd be interested to know, how does our choices impact our ability to achieve that goal, which I think the more debt we put on, I'm assuming it's going to make that more of a stretch.
We have a a charter to pass a balanced budget every year, so we're not gonna degrade the fund balance if we meet our budget.
Yeah.
So, if we put on the debt, then we are obligated to have revenue to cover that debt, so, I would say the risk is low that putting on additional debt is gonna degrade our fund balance.
But wouldn't,
But what's gonna degrade it is the incremental growth in revenues and expenses over the years, so,
Mhm.
we would need to be mindful of that.
Just last thing on debt management. I mean, my rule of thumb has always been is really to avoid any kind of peaks and valleys. Debt service is one of those things that can really all of a sudden one year, and Kate can attest to this, for whatever reason, you might have a lot retire a lot of debt, and all of a sudden, woo, we got big savings, and then it's going to rebound the other way. And so if our goal, and it has been, to maintain predictable and stable tax rates, to the extent that we can manage and level spread our debt costs, which have always been built in at about 15% of operating expenses. If we try to minimize any peaks and valleys for debt service, it really sets us up well to make sure that we're not seeing these wild increases.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a simplified version, but it's worked pretty well in terms of managing it over time.
Mhm. I agree. Right, anything else on this agenda item?
Would you like us to appear next time with that dashboard that reports?
Yeah, I
on
think that would be
stuff?
good. And I think, again, and if there's flexibility, like, again, this might be the bigger stretch for the exercise next time, is if that's also flexible to say, how does that dashboard change based on the choices we're making? Again, I know that's kind of doing
More about that, but yeah.
Right, anything else on this item? No, all right, Nick, you're up.
Okay, although this particular page somehow made its way in there 3 times, if you don't mind scrolling down to the purplish pink page, it's a few down.
That happened.
So there, we'll just start there. As was mentioned earlier, but just for the record, that this larger tax commitment report was added to the agenda on Tuesday, because that's when I finished it. And the prior pages are pages within this that I had submitted last week, so they were already in there, but there's overlap on the two. The larger tax commitment report is going to come at a council meeting on October 2nd. So it's a couple of weeks out, but this is more of a preview, high level overview, and perhaps if there's commentary about questions, I can incorporate them a couple of weeks from now. If you scroll down to page 5 of this, they're labeled at the bottom, starting with this one. 2, 3. And so these are just some of the big picture items of the tax commitment. We all know there was a revaluation this year. I think we were talking anecdotally that the resident and taxpayer consensus, it feels like people felt like they were communicated with and they felt like they knew it was happening. And there hasn't been that much after commitment, people wanting to talk to me, because we front loaded that before the bills went out. So I think that's all gone well. Now we're at a point where we're talking, well, what are the key takeaways? What did we change in value, or how did it impact people's taxes compared to maybe the estimates I provided months and months ago? So a big picture thing is that the townwide valuation increased by almost 2.7 billion. So in that middle portion there, you can see that 2678 number right above the 52%, the townwide. That's how much the taxable townwide value increased, $2.67 billion. And that is mostly due to the revaluation. The properties weren't at market value and they were brought up. Some of that would be new construction as well, but very minimal amount. It's hard in a reval year to quantify that exactly, but we had an exercise to get at that.
It's probably 120 million-ish.
And you know, with the adjustment, I would say it could be 150 because everything's adjusted up.
It's still a
But
very small portion.
Dropped in the
2.7.
bucket. Most of it was the revaluation, bringing things to market value. So
Can I just add,
Yeah.
one thing that pops out to me was the you know, last year we were celebrating the fact that non-residential was 25%. And it went down to 24%, which is not as bad as I think what we had originally thought. So it's still good to see that it's high, but I hope we, as a town, still continue to aspire to
We do, yeah.
bring that back up.
That was the tax shift that
Yeah.
residential taxpayers saw.
I think it's been more marked in other towns, like the shift, so I think it's because we've incentivized, you know, commercial construction in town, not just residential, that's only gone down that much. Another big picture item is that the tax rate, if you go down to the bottom of this page, it went down over 31%. That's the steepest decline in the history of, you know, the town's taxes. I look back 30, 40, 50 years. There was one year it was like 30% perhaps in the 80s or something for a reval, but that's quite notable. And it's the 1093 per thousand is the tax rate. That's even less than what had been estimated back in April at the 1105. And I'll speak to some of the reasons why it's a little different, just some big picture reasons why, but it's in the ballpark.
Can we say that we have the lowest tax rate in Cumberland County?
So it's perhaps, I did look into that, and rather than say we have the lowest or whatnot, you got to compare apples to apples. So I only looked at towns in Cumberland and York County that have done revaluations and that are comparable in size and whatnot even. And let's say there's 8 towns that have done a revaluation in the last 8 years. We are the lowest. The next closest is Cape Elizabeth at 11, but everyone else is 12, 13, 14. And if they haven't done a revaluation, like Lewiston, they're 30, you know, it's just night and day, the difference. So it's not apples to apples.
Yeah. But I think that's important. I think that's important.
Mhm.
Giveaways, we could have had a bigger budget.
I
this year.
know, sorry,
But whatever.
sorry,
It's fine.
sorry, Kate. But I mean, it's a good point. Like, I think this is where, you know, hindsight is 2020, but I think we had probably a little bit more wiggle room that unfortunately, some of the things that we probably were a little bit tight on this year, I think we could have kept.
Next year.
Yeah.
And if it matters, the anecdotal responses I've heard from residents are, they were grateful, especially the seniors that were hurt by the program
Yeah,
ending, that
sure.
the council did try their best to keep the budget modest this year. It was very appreciated, as was the increasing of the senior program rebate amount. I've heard
I
that.
think about your last conversation, we're gonna be going in the next several years with big ticket items. I think was very wise to build some goodwill to show that you
Yeah.
are
Mhm.
being, you know, sensitive to the bottom line.
And we have some big things next year too with the teacher contract, because that's gonna be a huge budget driver. I would
It's
think.
gonna keep that under control, I'm sure.
Yeah.
One other,
He's here, that's why I said it.
one other kind of key big number, if you scroll up one page, at a little around there, I showed a number under assessment statistics, considering all single-family homes, not waterfront though. The average assessed value and the median assessed value is 673 for average single-family home, non-waterfront, and 610 for median. And I was asked, well, what was it before? Because the other report from last year didn't quite speak to that exact metric. And respectively, the average was 443 and 400 was the median, which is a roughly 52% increase in assessed value, average and median from before the revaluation. And that tracks with the other metrics that'll be in the revaluation presentation on the second. So that's kind of the big picture items. The valuation went way up, tax rate went way down, and the average assessed value and median both went up about 52% for single family homes. The next biggest thing is just a couple bullet points on why was the tax rate lower than what I had estimated and you had all estimated with the figures I had given you back in April. There's a few reasons. Estimates that early on in the process, let's say 4 months before I was actually done the work, are best guess, but very informed estimates. And I personally use conservative estimates because I would hate to be wrong in the other direction. Furthermore, many people in the community, when we had these roundtables, told me that the prior reval that occurred in the worst direction, like the estimates were more favorable than what actually happened. They said, please don't let that happen. So some of the reasons why the taxable value was actually 80 million higher than I had estimated in April as my conservative estimate. One was the business personal property assets. I had said that might only go up 20%, but I don't know, because that takes months and months to quantify and process, and we hadn't even started because they were due in May. That ended up coming up 35% increase, not 20. So it was 16.5 million more value than I had projected, which is good. And then permits for new construction, although we had estimated what they would be, we hadn't done all the data entry yet. So that came out higher than we thought. New construction was more robust than we had estimated. And then furthermore, I had budgeted for informal appeals, which happened from May through August, to have a lot of people come, want to talk to me and get a reduction in their assessed value. Not saying that didn't happen, but it happened less than what I had budgeted for to still arrive at a good number. All that said and done, the taxable value was 80 million higher than the April estimates. And then furthermore, the budget, although less of a factor, came in about $94,000 less than the approved budget. So if you go to up a couple pages again, it's on pages 2 and 3 respectively. 2 is the actual budget right there. And then if you scroll down just for a second, that was what was approved in right before the vote, and then was voted on and was passed. So if you scroll to the bottom of this, you'll see that the net budget there was 85.58 million. And if you go up one page to the actual, you can see that it landed slightly lower, 85.48. So that's 94,000 less for a net budget than what was estimated. It's because at the bottom of this page, that the top portions, the municipal and school budgets were already approved and passed. So that didn't change. It's below the line. Some people call it on this document, like county assessment and below. Some of those change their estimates until the tax commitment occurs, so that.
And the final tax rate affects them
Yes.
in terms of TIF payments and credit
They
enhancement
both
obligations.
interact. So a couple of the notable ones that did change some, and it wasn't massive, but it did shift the balance a little. The downtown TIF was probably the biggest one. It came in 156,000 less. So that's an expense. So that's favorable. It wasn't as expensive as we thought to basically pay ourselves or pay the CEAs. And then the overlay came in 15,000 more. And I just wanted to speak to that because that's in my domain. I can never get an exact 500,000. It's a function of the tax rate and a computation the state gives me. And the next 1 cent less, the overlay would have been like 435,000. It's like night and day, 1 penny. It's $80,000 for every penny. So that was the closest one I could get to the 500,000 that we had, said was our goal, and it felt reasonable to pay for all the abatements if any are forthcoming. And then if it doesn't, that flows into the fund balance. So it's not going away.
I don't want to jinx ourselves, but based on your reception so far, it doesn't appear as though we'll need much of that 500 for abatement purposes.
And that'd be favorable and hopeful. But the reason why it was set higher than a normal year is because the last revaluation they spent well over $1 million. And I was like, well, I can do half as good. And I think we've done better than that. So, or twice as good,
I was
not
gonna
half,
say,
half as
yeah.
bad. There we go. So just to say the difference between the 1105 and the 1093, it's not, a straight line or anything, because all the numbers impact each other. But if you wanted to see, because I said every penny is $80,000, it amounts to $960,000. And, if you break that out, for every $1 million of value, somebody saved $100 compared to the estimate I gave them in May. So the letter you got, unless you talked to me and you got a reduction on your assessed value because you proved you were over-assessed, house assessed at 500,000, their bill was $50 less than I told them it would be in May on the estimate. And if your house is $1 million or your business is $1 million assessed value, your bill is $100 less than I tell you. So in the right direction, favorable. And some people have called us to say, why is it less? But then they don't ask more questions because they don't want to jinx it.
Yeah. That's good.
Although there's a whole packet, and I'm going to speak to that on October 2nd on a little more detail. I did want to include revaluation statistics, and they're in here at the, if you scroll way down. And the reason I did that, not only because I said I would, but it's mirroring what I said on the April workshop meeting, where I said, I project single-family homes or condos or this will go up by this much and their bill will be this much. I want to use those same tables and say what had actually happened. And I think remarkably, they were very close and all slightly more favorable than the estimates. That's about the takeaway. I think if you want to see one that's one of the more simple and popular ones that you could talk about on page 42, scrolling almost to the end of the submission here, third from the last page. That there, and I'll apologize that the bottom numbers don't add up to for the top three because it's a rounding thing. That should be 5.45 and 9.85, but I didn't go out enough decimal places, but it still stands. So just as a point of reference, we had used this because it was telling people of the factors, quote unquote, that affect your tax bill. You know, the budget itself only ended up having a 1.3% effect on your tax bill. And that's mirrored in these documents, why that is, but it's the council policy using the prior year's 90% of the total growth and the approved budget. That would have been the impact with new growth, but no reval. So if you had the budget you had and no reval, it's saying the tax rate would have only gone up 1.35%. That's incredibly modest. So that is, you know, that speaks to the hard work you did to keep the other factors from impacting people even more. The revaluation, the next line down, that's just based on averages and the statistics of all the data year over year. So it's not to say any one property had that exact situation. It's an average of all the properties, and these were homestead properties. So single family residences, condos, manufactured homes that are people's primary residences, of which there's, let's say, 6,000 in town. So homeowners. And then, so you see, if without the state program, it added up to 5.5, or rather 5.45% average increase. And there are tables in here that show the distribution. And some people had a decrease, some people had a 10% increase, but that's the average of that spread for someone not in the freeze program from the state, the stabilization program. And the participants of the senior state program that was ended by the state and repealed, they had yet another factor impact, as we discussed, and that's that third line, and that's 4.4%. That's the only one of these three that was actually statistically turned out to be higher than I had estimated. And the reason for that is I had neglected in my estimates to account for one of those three things to the right. I had said it is last year's 3.77% tax increase that, you know, they deferred because they were frozen at the prior year's bill, but everyone else had to increase by. It also didn't account for the fact that everyone else's homestead and veterans and solar exemptions went down, but theirs stayed the same because they were frozen. But the third one, that is the nuanced slight difference, that instead of having it be a 4% increase for the freeze, 4.4, is that another thing about the freezes, townwide, a lot of people built sheds or decks or garages or whatnot. And I'm not saying everybody did that, but on average, if you account for the fact that they didn't pay taxes on those sheds and decks and garages either, they were frozen at the tax bill. They incurred on average those increases townwide this year because they deferred them last year. So their assessed value, the people in the blue column, not in the state program, saw that impact last year. So, you know, if you didn't have a shed or a new garage, it's not a factor for you. So maybe the seniors in that situation would only have a 4% freeze factor just for the exemptions and the tax rate. But on average, some people in town had new construction or reservations that they didn't pay taxes on last year because the state did before them. And on average, it was incurred amongst that population this year.
Do you have information, it might be in here, on enrollment in the town rebate program since we extended the age? Like, did we see that increase?
The enrollment I only have is in here is retrospective. because the program goes until October 15th, so it's not concluded yet.
Okay.
So the numbers I have in here are always from the prior year. So last year's data, that wasn't applicable yet.
Mhm.
And all I can say is, as of this date, we have about 360 to 380, I think 360 applicants already approved and signed up. Last year, we had, at the end of the day, 410, 420 households. So, but it's very common to have 100 in the last month. So we've yet to see the impact, but I have heard anecdotally people coming in my office and like saying, oh, great, I qualify. I wouldn't have if the council hadn't raised the AGI. There's a lot of people in that 50 to 60,000 range, but I would say probably not as many as you think.
Yeah.
So it's going to be 20, 30, 40 households. It's not going to be hundreds.
Mhm. I'm just interested for us to continue to like keep an eye on that to say, because I know we kind of wanted to do something, wanted to do it quickly, but I still wonder, like, can we go more? Can we do more, especially with the debt coming? Like,
Mhm.
again, like, is there something the town can do for that population or for maybe a different population to try and, again, help with if we do have the decision to make about we can afford it on our debt, but maybe we can't afford it across Scarborough. Are there certain folks we can help make it more appealing? And I think we did a good job this year, but again, I wonder, can we go further?
Sure. And especially the increase to $1,000 maximum benefit has been very positively received. So even the people that continue to receive the benefit for the last 14 years said this really helps, especially this year where I got a slightly bigger tax increase than I have in prior years. It kind of wiped out that bigger increase for many of them.
John, one thing that this committee could do is ask Stacy Brenner, and forgive me, I'm blanking on our other rep's name at the moment, to come in here and talk about the state's tax policy and hear from us about why we think the state needs to have a more equitable method of paying for schools. And I think we can go on and do this forever, and we can give money back to people and try to keep people from being taxed out of their home. But the
Mhm.
fundamental problem here is that the way the state pays for education relative to our more creative neighbors to the south is sort of dark ages. And that if, for example, the state reserved a piece of the sales tax or added a point to the sales tax and built a fund which was invested, they could buy all of the schools that needed to be bought over time, and they would be earning money. I mean, if you look at our community center, it's a simple example, unrelated, but I just happen to know the numbers. Half of it over that 30-year period is interest cost,
Mhm.
right? Well, we know why we do that, because we can't basically reserve taxpayers' money. We need to pay it forward. But the state clearly can do that through a tax that would be paid at least in some great part by all of the many people who come up here and drive on our roads and go to our beaches and basically cause wear and tear and the like on our environment. So I'm making this little speech for those people who stay up at night and listen to this stuff on the YouTube. But I really think that we need to start engaging with our legislative people, and we
Mhm.
need to use the power of, Maine's, what are we, 4, 5, 6 largest community? I forget where we are standings. Sixth, yes. So we're not a small player in this game, and we need to start exercising that power, because we go on and on and on. And it's true across the entire state, is that we have an aging population, and paying for greater than half of our budget for schools is a regressive tax on people on fixed income. And that really does need to change, because all of us are raising our hands saying, yes, we love education, but maybe we'll have to move someplace else. Okay, and I hear that a lot from people, and they think it's unfair, And there's nothing we can do about it except advocate for that. So if we're on that topic, I think we should add that to the agenda and get serious about it.
I think we should too, and I think keep that thought as we go into the next council as a council goal, and would be interesting is to figure out where this sits on like GPCOG and Maine Municipal's
Mhm.
agenda as well, because again, I know everybody's pushing for building more houses. Part of the problem with building more houses is now you need bigger, more schools.
Right.
So if we're
Well,
gonna
it's a-
solve one problem, let's not
Yes.
keep the same problem. So again, I love that idea. I think let's,
Speaking of building more houses, I had a lovely meeting with Karen the other day and she presented me with a ton of data as she has a want to do. But one of my takeaways from our conversation was that Scarborough has done its fair share of providing, of meeting the state's housing goals.
Yeah.
So
all right, so anything else, Nick?
Is there anything from any of you that you'd also like me to report on at the October 2nd meeting that you didn't hear or see in this packet? Because I have time to look into it before then.
I mean, I thought you did an excellent
Okay.
job doing the highlights and,
Sure.
you know, would recommend you do the same
Yeah.
thing at the council meeting.
I feel like there's not necessarily a need to go into all the detail because it's all available and people can reach out to me personally. I think the high level overview will paint the picture and the agenda materials tell the detail.
the only thing I would do differently is I would move that little 1.3% piece all the way to the top. And the reason that I say that is because I'm sitting here looking at all of these numbers and I see 7% up here and 4% up here and so on. And I'm looking for 1.47% someplace and I can't find it. And then Eureka, you tell me it's 1.3. I'm very happy about
Yeah.
that, but don't bury the lead.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
I suspect it'll be more as slides and presentation mode as opposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These
I also
these
think-
tables.
Yeah.
To me, the thing is also like that point that we have the lowest tax rate for apples to apples. And I
Yeah.
think that's something, I know a lot of people in Scarborough are concerned about the tax rate, but I think we are doing a really good job
Mhm.
having a lot of amenities. And I think unfortunately, partially why that's so low is because we have not taken action on things like a library expansion, a community center. And I think now's the time while it's low to hopefully start making some of those investments.
Mhm.
All right, before we go to public comment, I just want to kind of take a second because I think our next meeting might be our last meeting of this finance committee, and I'm not sure what the makeup is going to look like. So what I would like to have on the agenda is making sure that we do the exercise we talked about.
I have it.
If staff is ready to come back to us with the TIF policy adjustment, since that was something we also had as a council goal to try and get through
Mhm.
this council, I think that would be good in case we can get it to.
Yeah, we spent time with the Housing Alliance, so I think we are in a position to turn that draft back to you.
Yes, I think if we just got the next draft to look at
See
it and make
April.
sure we're good with it, I think that would be good. Are there other topics that counselors would like on the agenda? I have a running list of things that we wanted to get to that we didn't get to. And so if there are other topics that we can try and squeeze in, you know,
I'd like to circle back on one we did get to, and I forget where I was forgetting the last meeting, my public apologies, at which time I would have said that I had a nice meeting with Tom and Norm and Liam, in which we discussed a template, if you will, for presentation of budget numbers that I think we agreed would add some clarity and simplicity to it, and I have left that in your able hands, but I just don't want to lose sight of that because I'm really hoping that that will survive into the next council and that we can sort of start off our budget process with a template to be filled in that we all sort of understand.
so showing that and getting feedback at the next.
Well, yeah, well, I don't know if, I think what I heard from you all is that you had a lot of stuff on the plate
Mhm.
and that you agreed that this made sense to do and that we would continue to work on it.
Mhm.
I know you have a lot of things to do. It's not necessary for me to see it necessarily at the next meeting. I just want to make sure that it stays at least on the middle burner. And
It
continues
is, and I
to
think we'll
progress.
probably like to check in, if you're not on finance, we can certainly check in with you individually.
Yeah.
Before we present the budget to make sure we're on track.
Is it safe to say that our next meeting is our last one? Because technically,
It is.
okay, that's what I figured. Karen?
Yep.
I sort of feel like personally, that would be a conversation for the new finance committee to come in with the feedback and say, you know, what is your feedback, new finance committee? I mean, the only thing that I'm gonna continue to plug away with that I have brought up since the time I've been elected is the exploration of a stormwater management fee. I don't know if this is something that we need to discuss at our goal session come January. I don't know if it's something that staff can pull together. I mean, typically the first step of determining if you want a stormwater management, and I just want to mention that previously we said that we are the sixth largest municipality. 4 of the municipalities that are larger than us have stormwater management fees. So I don't take this lightly when I suggest it. I understand it's a big lift, but I mean, typically the first step would be to identify how many properties are actually developed in Scarborough, and then go to the Public Works and Angela's budget and say, you know, what would be covered under the stormwater management fee? The idea behind this, and I will continue to advocate for this, is we have multiple commercial residents or commercial properties in this town who are not paying taxes, and there's no implication they are not responsible for the fact that they are plowing and creating all of the stormwater, and that they are not paying a dime to manage it, and it is on the taxpayers' back to pay for that. And I think that there is a big discrepancy, and I think it's worth to continue to explore this. And I think it's very straightforward how you it would at least try to identify how many people would be paying the fee and then what would be covered by it. I don't know if you recall, when we were in our April session with Doug Howard, I specifically asked him, can plowing be covered under a stormwater management fee? I think there's a very gray area, and I think a lot of things could be covered under it. Pulling it out of like the general taxpayer's wallet and part of our budget for that, and creating this fee. And so I don't know if there's like initial first steps that can be taken to see if it's feasible for Scarborough, if you have to find a consultant immediately. My understanding is you don't. You can at least look and see how much, you know, with GIS, how many properties are developed and go from there.
Mhm.
But I'm going to continue to advocate for this. And as I said, I think maybe if it has to be put off to the January goal setting session, I just really think we need to find better ways to tax or get fee people and have it equitable throughout the town.
Yeah, it's kind of like this different perspective you had of, we need the state to do some stuff. There's more stuff we could do to keep Scarborough
And this is a
affordable.
fee that is normal in other towns, you know, Intermed is moving here, Intermed is used to paying this in Portland and South Portland, so this isn't weird, this isn't abnormal, this isn't unfair. This is how taxes or towns are using a better way to
Mhm.
get money.
So maybe, probably not on the agenda, but I would say, sounds like we have 2 council goals forming, and since we're all gonna be here, you know, I think let's keep working on those together in preparation for the next council goal setting to see what we can do in terms of bringing those 2, engaging the state on schools, affordability, stormwater as potential things we might want to do. Cool. All right, with that, I'll go to public comment. Is there anybody in the public who would like to offer comment?
There's nobody online.
Nobody online, nobody in the room, closing public comment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Thanks, everyone.